Good evening. The rig to drill Uganda's long-awaited oil sank into the grounds at the Kingfisher on Tuesday, casting away any doubt that Uganda would delay its commercial oil production. With commercial oil just 2 years away now, focus is slowly shifting to how ready Uganda's government is to apportion the revenues that will flow from the black gold. Tonight on the spot is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, Irene Batebe, and the Chief Operations Officer of the Uganda National Oil Company, Phillips Obita. Thank you very much, lady and gentlemen, for having honored our invitation. I want to ask you to allow me to refer to you as Irene and Phillips. Is that okay?
It's okay. Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having honored our invitation, Madam Permanent Secretary Irene. Let me begin with you because 2 days ago, I think President Yoweri Museveni was at Kingfisher, and there was the official, beginning of the drilling of oil at that well. What is the significance of that ceremony that took place?
Thank you very much, Patrick, for having us on this show and for inviting the Minister of Energy specifically to the show. Yes, we did have a momentous occasion the day before yesterday, and it did launch the commencement of drilling for our oil and gas resources. And for us, as the Minister of Energy, but also government, that goes to symbolize the fact that we are on track to achieve our first oil in 2025. You will recall in February of this year, we did have the announcement of the final investment decision, which confirmed that we were set to produce our oil come 2025. So largely that function was confirmation that we are on a path of no return, and we are going forward with our planned production. So
you have the drilling began just yesterday, about when? I'm wondering, you have no pipeline, you have no central processing facility available, and if the black gold is gotten out from the ground, where do you put it? Do you have huge storage capacity in that area?
Thank you, Patrick. So as part of the planning, we are also working on putting those infrastructure in place, and they will move in tandem with the plans for drilling for the upstream. As part of our commercialization plan, we are planning for a crude oil pipeline that will enable us to evacuate the resource that we are going to produce, but also an oil refinery that is also under plan. As we speak, the progress of the East Africa crude oil pipeline is also in tandem with the upstream. We are concluding a number of activities to ensure that when the upstream is ready, when production is ready, the crude oil pipeline is also in place, and shortly the oil refinery will also follow. So there will be no instance where the upstream is ready to produce and there is no place to place the crude oil. The pipeline will be ready in tandem with the upstream production.
So what happened 2 days ago was just testing the equipment?
What happened 2 days ago, what we call the spudding or commencement of drilling, and specifically for Kingfisher, is the commencement for the drilling of the wells. In that particular location, we have about 31 wells, so we have to drill quite a number, and that should enable us be in time for the production come 2025. So out of these 31 wells, 20 of them will be our production wells from where we shall produce the crude oil, and then the other 11 are injection wells where we pour the water that supports or drives the production. So all of that is what we will see in the next 2 years as we move towards production, the drilling of those different wells.
All right. Phillips Obita, for Ugandans who have no opportunity to go at Kingfisher or any other place where the drilling is going on, can you kindly paint a picture for the person who's watching you right now to know what is going on, what opportunities exist, and how they could actually benefit as of now?
Thank you very much, Patrick Amara, and good evening, viewers. First, I want to appreciate the invitation that you have extended to us, the Uganda National Oil Company, to come and be part of the talk show today. Now, I think on the onset, I just want to highlight that the opportunities are enormous. And PS has just highlighted that the event that took place on Tuesday was just the commencement of drilling. Now, in order for the drilling operation to be conducted efficiently and to ensure that all the wells, the 31 wells that are intended to be drilled in Kingfisher are drilled and completed, there are a lot of services that are required to support that activity. Now, the drilling contractor, the main drilling contractor is really one company. In the case of Kingfisher, it's COSIL, the China Oilfield Services Limited. However, as the main contractor, they do subcontract out very many services that are required to support them to deliver their contract to us, the investors, and the operator, CNOOC. Now, those include logistics, for example, telecommunication, catering services, and other, common services that are required to enable the personnel deliver the activities. Now, the drilling is a process, and I wanted to just touch on the point, so you're concerned that you raise. We are going to drill these wells, and the wells will be ready, while the other infrastructure that are required to, deliver the crude and get it to the export to the market will not be ready. Drilling is a process. For the case of Kingfisher, some of the wells are pretty deep. On that specific pad where the rig was sitting on Tuesday, PS Irene indicated that there will be 10 wells drilled on that specific pad. Now, drilling of those 10 wells, Mr. Kamara, will take about 12 months. Yeah?
12 months?
12 months.
Okay.
7 of those wells are production wells, the wells that will be producing oil and gas from the ground and delivering it to the surface, and 3 will be injection wells. Now, there are three other pads where wells will be drilled from. And so the drilling process will continue. The wells will be completed. Now, completion of a well means once you have drilled it and you have reached the target where you intend to produce from, you now prepare the well and make it ready for production.
What kind of depth are we talking about?
In the Kingfisher area, we are looking at reservoirs that are in the order of 2,400 meters vertical depth. But because the Kingfisher
that's quite
field,
a distant depth.
Yes. But the drilling itself will go beyond 2,400 meters because the Kingfisher field is sitting under the lake and the rig is sitting onshore. And so to reach the reservoirs, we have to drill a deviated well, and that means the actual length of the well will be much longer than the vertical depth to the reservoir. So in some cases, the wells will be drilled up to 4 kilometers in length.
All right. Now,
Yes.
Irene, you can imagine that oil has been found in an area that is ecologically sensitive. And you're talking about drilling deep and going vertical and maybe under Lake Albert. I want to know whether you are ready for any possible eventuality, God forbid, an oil spill in Lake Albert or an oil spill in the Nile River that could bring you a disaster of biblical proportion.
And as part of our preparation over the years, we have prepared for such an eventuality, and we've also put mitigation measures to ensure we can avoid that. So we do have robust environmental requirements, and we've worked with the National Environment Management Authority, but together with the Ministry of Water and Environment, to put in place the required legal and regulatory framework to ensure that we are monitoring and regulating the environmental aspects in a good way. But in addition to that, the companies are required to undertake comprehensive environmental social impact assessments that are well consulted on. So we have public hearings where we get input from our different stakeholders to ensure we've addressed all the potential risks. And as part of this process, we've also put in place a national oil spill contingency plan, which was launched by the Prime Minister last year. And as part of that plan, we have a framework, but also a committee that is closely monitoring these operations. And our regulator, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, on a day-to-day basis, operates and ensures that these operations are being undertaken in a compliant way.
I'm asking this, and it scares me. I don't know whether you have read about the Macondo disaster. The Macondo disaster, there was a spill of some kind, I think a sinking of a rig in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
And that caused a headache to a technologically advanced America, almost to their knees. How about us? God forbid, if that happened.
And exactly, so those are the structures we've put in place. And when you look at our environmental social impact assessments, we've assessed all these risks as part of our risk framework with clear mitigation measures. So these companies are required to ensure such mitigation measures are deployed. And then working with the government, we have that framework under the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan to ensure that we quickly respond to such eventualities, God forbid.
I'm told quite colossal sums of money will be invested in this area in the development phase, about $15 billion or thereabout.
Yeah.
How much of that money can actually remain in Uganda for Ugandans?
Well, yes, you're right. The development of the different oil and gas projects, and by that I mean we have the two projects in the upstream, the Telenga and Kingfisher, but they're very closely integrated with the crude oil export pipeline, the ECOP. So the development of these projects will require quite some significant amount of capital expenditure. And like you rightly pointed out, for the case of Kingfisher, for example, we expect to spend up to a tune of $2.4 billion in CAPEX, capital expenditure. Now, that is during the development phase.
Yes.
But we also expect a lot of investment during the production phase. We call it operations phase, to the tune of about $1.8 billion over the life of the field. So that's roughly about $80 million per year during the operations phase. So that is just to paint the picture that the money that is going to come in the country is not just during the development phase, but also there will be a lot of investment during the operations, the production phase. Yes. Now the Telenga is a much bigger development. And so the current estimate is we are going to spend just about $4 billion in capital expenditure to develop the Telenga. And the operation expenditure will be in the order of $100 to $150 million per year. So that's quite a significant amount of money that will be coming in the country. Now, of course, the oil and gas industry is a very highly technologically advanced sector. In order for our national players, the service providers, the national service providers, to play a meaningful role in the sector, there's a lot that they have to do. However, there are low-hanging fruits. And these are currently in the form of about 16 sector categories that have been ring-fenced for Ugandan companies, Ugandan entities. And for us in the sector, we see those as the gateway for entry of the Ugandan players in the sector, those that are interested. Now, the legal regime in the sector provide quite some options and opportunities for our national players to grow their skills and technology base. For example, for services that cannot be provided by Ugandan entities now, the laws and the regulation requires that as the next option, the international service providers should try to joint venture with the local service providers. And joint venturing offers a lot of opportunity for growth for our local companies in terms of transfer of technology, development of skills, and so on and so on. Now, there's a lot of effort that is going into what we call in the industry national content to ensure that we maximize the value of investment that will remain in the country.
Yeah, that's what I want to know, because you just said the oil sector is technologically advanced.
Yes.
It requires high skills. It requires colossal sums of money, and you have a policy of the local content. I'm wondering whether we can be able to up our game and even partake the 30% of the local content, considering what is required in this industry and the skills gap that we have.
Absolutely. So it's a process to develop the local content or national content and maximize the take that we can from the investment. But I think the current figures that our regulators, the Petroleum Authority, are indicating from the key project contracts that have already been awarded. Usually, like I pointed out a little earlier, you have a few key project contracts, the main tier 1 contracts. But then below that, these tier 1 contractors are required to engage many other contractors and subcontractors to deliver on their contract. And so they go out to get those joint ventures between international IOCs and local companies. And so the regulator currently indicated that the total amount of contracts from tier 2 and below that have been awarded to Ugandan entities and joint ventures between Ugandan entities and international service providers are in the order of $1.3 billion.
Okay. Irene, it is also possible that a company can start from Portugal, France, or China, register in Uganda. After 2 years, it is considered a Ugandan company, right?
It is possible.
So some of those companies Mr. Obita is talking about could actually be that kind of case, that originally they were from Portugal, originally they are from France, and they have been here for 2 years, and since they have registered here, then they are Ugandan. Money will come to Kampala only to bounce back. That's my worry.
So when we measure national content, we look at the entire value that we get from these companies. When they're here, we look at the level of employment of Ugandans. We look at the level of value they bring through the purchase of goods and services within the country. And the issue of shareholding is something that we are still looking at. But we continue to encourage our local companies to enter joint ventures with these companies for purposes of maximizing this local content. Otherwise, if you're to only restrict it to Ugandan companies, you'll find that you're dealing with issues of some gaps, liquidity, but also capability, because it's a nascent industry. We continue to develop our capacity as Ugandans. So for now, the local content looks at the total sum of value, the number of Ugandans you employ, the value you invest in the country in terms of goods and services, but also the foreign direct investment made in the project to be able to drive our national content.
So how far have you gone as the ministry, or even as Uganda, in trying to impart skills on the Ugandan workers to be able, for example, in the technical sector? I know there's been a lot of training, but most of them managerial, administrative, and legal. But I'm talking about people who will be really doing the actual work, the education to do. How much of that has been done in Uganda?
There's been quite some effort in that regard, and we've worked with a number of universities, but also vocational technical institutions. If you go today to Makerere, we worked with them to introduce a Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Geoscience to be able to churn out a critical mass of petroleum geoscientists. But we are also aware of the Chambogo University that has also introduced aspects of oil and gas. But when it comes to the technical level, we also work with Ministry of Education. We've set up the Uganda Petroleum Institute of Chigumba that is focused on aspects of technicians, vocational training, the hands-on artisanal training, to ensure that we are having all these critical mass of technicians working on the project. But we also continue to work with them. I know that we've worked to ensure that their courses are certified, because that is one of the complaints at the time that the oil companies were raising, that fine, you have Ugandans who have been trained, but they are not certified to do the work. So we've introduced a number of certifications to ensure that these Ugandans can be employed. So there's been quite some effort in training Ugandans, and right now we see them applying for jobs, and we hope that they can be integrated in the industry.
And talking about jobs, Phillips, how many jobs are we talking about now? How many have you created so far? How many is this industry likely to create? Because that's a big deal for Uganda, isn't it?
Yes, thank you. I think that is, in a way, the key context in which we should see the criticality of the milestone that was achieved on Tuesday with the commencement of the drilling. The benefit of the benefit that the industry will accrue to this country, and one of them is employment, just like you highlighted. So the estimation that we have currently is that the integrated Telenga, Kingfisher and Eco projects will generate up to close to 70,000 jobs at peak, during peak construction. And this cuts across skilled jobs, semi-skilled jobs, and unskilled jobs. Now, as we speak now, by close of the year, the Telenga and Kingfisher, the two upstream projects alone, were already, reaching to about 10,000 jobs. 10,000 jobs as we speak?
jobs,
yes.
That is a huge opportunity for people who are into services like catering, accommodation, and other services. I think that's a windfall for Police and Hoyman, whoever is involved already. Absolutely.
And as a matter of fact, if you visited the operation areas, you'll get amazed because there's a lot of activities that is going on. And if we took the example of Telenga, for example, in Bulisa, there's a lot of work that is going on around the central processing facility, where the central processing facility will sit. Now, it's a handful of contractors who are working there, and all of them are bringing in their employees to come and deliver on the contracts that they have been given, as part of the project. You also have the contractors that are working on the well pads, where the rigs are going to come and begin to drill. You also have contractors that are working on enabling infrastructure, like opening up access roads to enable the contractors that are supposed to lay some of these pipelines. There's going to be many kilometers of pipelines in those areas. Forget about the ECO for now. Even within the Telenga alone, there are pipelines that are going to be connecting the different well pads to deliver the crude that will be produced from the different wells to the central processing facility. And that Telenga in itself will have about 185 kilometers of infill pipeline network. Then there will be a pipeline running from the CPF, the central processing facility in Telenga, to Kabale, where at the delivery point where the journey for the ECO pipeline begins. That's about 100 kilometers. So you have this, what we call surface facilities, these infill pipelines, the feeder pipelines, the CPF locations, which have to be reached by these contractors. And so there's a lot of civil works going on to get those access roads, to ensure that the contractors will reach those sites. There's a lot of contractors who are now engaged in, delivering the contracts. For example, we have the CPF EPC contractor on site. And you can imagine they've set up a camp that is supposed to accommodate at peak 6,000 employees. Currently, the portion that has been built now can accommodate 1,200. And all those are going to be employees working on site, and many of them are now going in.
So that's going to be the biggest lodging facility in Africa, 6,000 people in one place. I suppose
it's going to be used.
That should be a spectacle for somebody to see.
Certainly.
But Irene, I know at the very beginning, President Yoweri Museveni was so passionate about the refinery. In fact, I'm told some of the delays were caused by the president saying, we must have a refinery. And in all this discussion, I'm not hearing so much about the refinery. And yet this was the big thing. What happened?
The oil refinery remains still among our critical projects that we are working on. And just to remind you, this is a very important project because today in the entire of the East African region, we are all importing our petroleum products. So for us, the oil refinery is a matter of security of supply of our petroleum products. So the planning for the oil refinery is on course, and we have a developer that we are working with to prepare for the development of a 60,000 barrels per day refinery. And just compare that with our consumption in terms of petroleum today, we are consuming about 40,000 barrels per day. So that refinery is meant to serve Uganda and our immediate neighbors, Western Kenya.
The capacity of 60,000
barrels per day.
But if you're calculating 60,000 barrels per day now, then by the time you reach 2030, you'll find that you have really a small facility.
We do have plans for expansion depending on how our crude oil discoveries go. So that is part of the plan. So we want to invest in this first stage refinery, and you can always expand should that need arise, as it will be.
Have you tried to find out why most countries in Africa, Nigeria, Angola, Sudan, that have oil, have not really been able to build their own refineries? What is the problem, and how is Uganda going to do it different?
Just to allay your fear, actually these countries have developed refineries.
I know until recently that Dangote is building one of the biggest, but they have not in Sudan. Maybe there was a refinery in Kenya of imported crude, which also closed, I'm told.
Yes, so there are key drivers for the viability of any refinery. For a refinery to make commercial sense, number one, you must have the demand. And for the Ugandan refinery, we do have an internal demand that continues to grow, but also our immediate neighbors. Because we did undertake a study that showed us our captive market, where this refinery can potentially supply product. So when it comes to the demand, we are assured of a demand in the country. The other key driver will be the source of crude oil. And for Uganda, we are blessed that we had already discovered our crude oil source. So that goes to make the refinery a viable project. And then you deal with issues of your location and the logistics and the technology that you're going to put in place. So all the assessment we've done in the country has indicated that this refinery is very viable. It presents robust economics. As we speak, even its internal rate of return is in the regions of 20%, showing that it's a healthy return on investment.
Well, but you are on the mercy of the people with the money and the technology to build it and for them to buy into your idea. Because I understand at one point, I think you were in touch with a Russian company, is it RT Global, to build a refinery, but before you knew it, that plan was crumbling, falling apart. Maybe that's your bad of never trying to do due diligence. What happened? Why did RT Global crumble?
Okay, that process we closed, but really the reason we didn't proceed at the time were exogenous factors. They were sanctioned, and it wasn't to do with the viability of the project. It was a different cause. But as we speak, we are on track to develop the refinery, and in terms of its structuring, it will be developed 40% shareholding held by the Uganda National Oil Company, and we are already in the process of putting the contribution in terms of equity for the Uganda National Oil Company to invest.
How much money are we talking about, Irene?
So for the total investment, we are looking at about $4 billion, and the 60% will be a contribution by the private investors.
And do you have that 40%?
Yes, so
we're talking about over $1 billion.
No, our equity contribution to the refinery will be $480 million.
That doesn't make it 40%, does it?
The refinery is going to be developed through both equity and debt financing. Okay. On a ratio of 40-60. So when you compute the 40% equity contribution that is expected of the shareholders, then UNOC's share of its 40% participating interest or shareholding will be about $480 million.
So you have already identified somebody to build the refinery? I'm more interested about the refinery than even more. I think I'm a student of Museveni on this one, about the refinery than even a pipeline. Do you already have somebody to build that? Do we have a final investment decision on that?
So in terms of its development, we do have a developer that we are working with, and we have committed, we have a project framework agreement with this investor, and the commitment we have in there is to ensure we achieve the final investment decision this year come June. So we are working to ensure that we are able to mobilize the financing to be able to achieve that target, albeit a number of challenges that we continue to address.
I understand a couple of weeks back you licensed 2 other entities to do more exploration of oil in Uganda, right? And that should come with exciting news, Philip. What are your expectations?
Absolutely, Mr. Kamara. And interestingly, one of the companies is ourselves, Uganda National Oil Company.
Yes, yeah, it's a Ugandan company, yes.
So, yes, I think importantly to note is that oil and gas is a finite resource, and therefore, as you start production from the reserves that you have already established, for sustainability, you need to ensure that you replace the reserves that you produce. So as a country, I think it's a step in the right direction that we continue to license new companies to continue to explore for new oil and gas resources, so that when we start producing crude from the Tilenga and Kingfisher fields that we are currently developing, hopefully we'll have more discoveries to replace the reserves that we'll be producing from this current development. So for us as a national oil company, I think we take the news of the award of the current licenses with a lot of excitement, but also appreciation to our key stakeholders, the Ministry.
And as you know, which part of the area are you exploring? I'm sure now you're looking for the juicy part, the most probable.
Yes. And especially given that we have human resource that have very good knowledge of the local environment. Well, we certainly put in our application with that in mind, that we are looking for the area that we believe has the highest potential. So we have been, Cabinet did approve the award of a PSA to UNOC for a block called the Kasurbani block.
Kasurbani? Where is that?
Kasurbani block is a block that sits just south of the Tilenga production license boundary. So it covers a bit of onshore, the areas of Bulisa, onshore, just within the boundary of the Tilenga production license that is awarded to Total, Sinok and ourselves, and then a bit of it goes into the northern portion of Lake Albert. The total area
of Acholi region?
No. The Wangseko, Panyimur, no, it doesn't reach Panyimur. Wangseko, okay. Then south.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it's quite a sizable block because it covers an area of about 1,285 square kilometers. It's an area that has been previously explored by Tallow a bit, and some few wells drilled. So in terms of data over the block has quite some significant amount of data that we can start from to begin to build our story on what we believe is the potential in the block.
I understand there's a lot of hope that we could actually be seated on serious oil wells across this country. People have talked about the Kadama Basin in Karamoja and other areas. But the question is, you know, as we do this oil exploration, the world is transitioning. There's a hype on in the world of, you know, energy transition. And the other day we had the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and they're talking about moving away from fossil fuel. Because as a humanity we're facing an existential threat because we're destroying our environment. And oil is a catalyst. So we have to adapt or die. Does that concern you?
Okay, as the government of Uganda, we are very aware of that global movement, and we did participate actively at COP27, where we also did have a position and also informed the African position. Where we sit, this oil and gas will continue to play a critical role in meeting our energy security, even for the future. What we need to do is ensure that we are producing it in a sustainable manner when it comes to environment. And today we are seeing advances in technology, and we are having cleaner technologies where we can be able to produce this oil and minimize on the environmental impact. And surprisingly, even at by COP27, we saw a number of countries open up new production, and they are planning to open up new areas for licensing. The British, North Sea, but also Scotland. At the end of the day, it speaks to the issue of energy security. So the way we look at it in Uganda, the revenues from this oil will play a critical position in advancing our energy transition. These revenues that we'll get from oil and gas are what we will inject in investment in our renewable energy future. As we speak today, in order for us to electrify the entire of this country, we need almost about $5 billion US. So where will that revenue come from other than from these natural resources that we have? So for us as a country, critically is to ensure sustainable exploitation of these resources, deploy advanced technology, and for Uganda, we are in a good place because we are just starting our production, meaning that we are able to tap into the latest, cleaner technologies.
Okay, you talk about the revenues will be plowed into here, gotten here and used for this, but you also know the Ugandan experience. We're not very good at using public resources, issues of integrity. In fact, today you're celebrating 37 years of the NRM in power. When the president came in, he had 10-point program, and point number 7 was about fighting corruption, and that has continued to be a big deal even today. In fact, even getting worse. So I'm worried when you have such a big deal whether somebody is not going to dip their hands in the public resources like the Ugandan way.
And in our planning, and revenue management is among our key pillars enshrined even in our national oil and gas policy. So today, working with Ministry of Finance, we've ensured that we do have an oil and gas revenue management policy. But arising from that policy, we've gone ahead in the Public Finance and Management Act to provide for how the proceeds from the oil and gas industry will be put to use. And the Public Finance and Management Act is very clear that these proceeds will go to infrastructure development. Okay. And we've already seen that from the Petroleum Fund, we've been able to fund some of our critical infrastructure today, including one of our major dams, Karuma. So there is already precedence that we can put these revenues to good use.
Okay, Irene Bateva and Phillips Obita, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'll be asking whether the public debt that we have of 78+ trillion Uganda shillings, whether that does not mean we have already mortgaged our oil before it even gets out of the ground. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara. My guests tonight are Irene Bateve, Permanent Secretary, Minister of Energy and Mineral Development, and Phillips Obita from UNOC, and we're discussing the oil sector. You know, I understand also construction works were going on for building an airport in a place called Kabale, right? At what level are those construction works as we speak?
Yes, as part of our plans to ensure we are addressing the issue of logistics and moving of equipment and personnel, we did determine that we needed to set up an international airport. It's right at the heart of the oil and gas region in Kabale, in Hoima district. And we work with Ministry of Works and Transport on this project. As we speak, the construction works have progressed at about 83% completion, meaning that the airport should be ready in time to support the peak time of construction for the oil and gas.
So at 83, you have the runway, I suppose? The
runway is done, and we are now working on the other auxiliary facilities, including the control tower.
I was there at the beginning when people were being displaced, well, because you were supposed to be compensating them. I wonder whether everybody was fully compensated, but I also know there's a group of people who decided that government should build for them homes. I think in a village called Nyamasoga, right? I wonder whether those homes have been settled in and whether the people are comfortable. And the issue of compensation, how are you dealing with that?
Okay, for this particular project, we did acquire 29.57 square kilometers as part of the wider Kabale Industrial Park, but also accommodating that international airport. And
you took an entire sub-county?
Yes, we did. We did do that. So we did undertake a comprehensive resettlement action plan for that land acquisition process. And as we speak, we have compensated over 99% of the affected persons, those who opted for cash compensation. And for the group that opted for resettlement, the houses were completed. We have 46 houses that were set up in one of the villages to ensure that we can resettle these affected persons. And that process is done in a comprehensive manner, not only for the refinery, but be it for East Africa crude oil pipeline and the upstream facilities. We undertake robust land acquisition processes that follow our requirements legally, but also the IFC and Equator principles for land acquisition. So for this particular 29.57 square kilometers, we can say the land has all been acquired.
So the people who opted for resettlement, I hope you have not built a camp for them instead.
Not at all. We do have a physical plan for that area. So we must look into the future. Where they are being resettled is a future developed area. So we ensured that they align with that development. So it's not a camp. We ensured they are settled in an organized way, just like you'd have an estate in any other location, even in the city. So that's a kind of estate we set up. They do have their farmland. They're able to farm.
Or they have a piece of land to till somewhere,
yes,
and homes in another place.
Yes, and they have settled in quite well. I know that initially there was a lot of incitement by NGOs, but later on the affected persons did realize the benefit that comes with that setup. They're able to access utilities, be it power. It's easy to get the power there, which we did. It's easy to get them water because they're in one location.
And I can imagine maybe in the near future they can even hire them, rent out those homes to get more money and go somewhere else, which could be a big deal for them. And so how about the EACOP line where the pipeline is going to go? Because land acquisition in Uganda is such a huge challenge. I've seen people in the road sector suffering. I wonder what challenges you meet and how you're going about them from these other districts where the pipeline is going to go through before it exits into Tanzania.
Yes, within the Ugandan section, the East Africa crude oil pipeline occupies about 296 kilometers, and it traverses about 10 districts, running from Hoima down to Mutukula. 10 districts. So we have, and we are acquiring a 30-meter corridor that then continues into Tanzania. So we have worked with the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline Company, where UNOC is a shareholder, to ensure that we advance the land acquisition process for this pipeline. Today, as we speak, we are already in the process of compensating the affected persons, and we are reporting over 60% of the affected persons having been compensated. And for those who opted for resettlement, plans for construction of their resettlement houses are also advanced, and the initial lot should also be getting their houses shortly. So that land acquisition process has progressed and well. The challenges that we continue to face are largely on contestation of valuation rates. Usually when the population hears it's an oil and gas project, it raises expectations. At some point, we had affected persons requesting to be paid in petro dollars. But we do have a standard process for evaluation. We have the chief government valuer who helps us arrive at the agreed value, especially for the crops, working with the district land boards, and based on that valuation, we proceed to start our compensation. So we do follow a systematic process to arrive at these valuation rates.
What happens, Phillips, when you reach a community or a family that put a lot of value on their land that is even beyond what a government valuer is going to say? You know, like in Uganda, they can say these are burial grounds, these are what, you know, the price on them, they're even priceless. How do you go about that?
Yeah, yes, I think just to first paint a picture of what proportion of the PAPs we are talking about that fall in that category. As a matter of fact, for the ECOP, for example, we, in the Ugandan part of the pipeline route, we have established up to about 3,648 PAPs. Now,
Project-affected persons.
Project-affected persons.
Okay.
And now out of this number, it's only about 5.5% that are going to be physically displaced, meaning they will have to move. And those are the categories that you're trying to describe. Either their houses have been
directly in the line.
Their houses directly in the line, or their graves and things like that. The rest, the 94.5%, PAPs that the pipeline only passes through a portion of their land. And those ones, we will compensate them for the disturbances on that portion of the land. Now, of the 5.5% or so, which I think comes to about 205 or something PAPs that have to be physically, 210 PAPs that have to be physically relocated. It's actually only 2 PAPs, or shall I call it 2 homesteads, that have sort of contested the evaluation of their land, their property. Now, when you look at it from that angle, the entire project has a very good acceptance rate in terms of accepting the valuation and compensation that they are to be given. So now to your question, what do we do with those 2 homesteads? Of course, now as a project and as the shareholders of the company, we have quite an elaborate process that we go through to try to get to some alignment with PAPs that are in that category. We engage them further and try to educate them and try to share some new thoughts with them and see whether we can come to some agreement. In the event that that doesn't work out, then of course as a project, the option that we have is, as a ministry, to work with our counterparts in the Ministry of Lands to explore the option of compulsory acquisition. But that comes at the very last, the tail end, really, as a last resort, because like PS Irene said, we have ensured that our projects comply not only to the laws of Uganda and Tanzania, but also the IFC performance standards. Okay,
I know there has been a lot of talk in Europe, especially in the European Parliament, about the pipeline itself that is passing through an ecologically sensitive area. And I wonder whether that fire has really gone down, or you still have to contend with such challenges in Europe about people who are opposed, including some non-government organizations here are opposed to the pipeline, thinking that it's going to cause trouble to our environment. Is everybody now on board?
Yes, I think there's been a lot of discussion, like you said, on the environmental concerns of the pipeline. And as we speak now, I believe you must have also noticed that it's getting a lot better. The acceptance of the project is now much better from where we were when the European Parliament raised those concerns. And largely because we have gone out and provided as much information about the project and some of the facts about the issues that they were raising. The issues around the pipeline traversing very ecologically sensitive environments, we had to go out and present the facts and say that, look, for the entire length of the pipeline, 1,443 kilometers, you know, it is only 8% of that length that actually passes through areas that have been gazetted as protected areas. And even then, we have made a lot of effort through many iterations to ensure that the pipeline only passes through the edges of those habitats, yeah, and not through the protected areas in a manner that will, cause, more severe impact to that environment. And so, in totality, when you look at it, the total area in acreage of the areas that are gazetted as protected areas that the pipeline passes through is just about 3.5 square kilometers. But just to try to put this again to our viewers, that information played a very key role in trying to, ensure that some of the concerns now goes away. And simply because a lot of things like, for example, the rivers that were said the pipeline was crossing, we had to go out and say, look, when you look through the entire route of the pipeline, there are largely 3 rivers, that, or water bodies that you call rivers, that actually the pipeline passes through. And the key ones are actually River Kafu and River Katonga, yeah? The rest we don't see, right? But even then, the process of assessing the environmental impact of the pipeline has been so rigorous, yeah, to the extent that the principle has been to avoid impact wherever possible, and where we cannot avoid, we have to minimize the impact as much as possible. And so in that hierarchy, in the event that we have impacts that we have to mitigate, there is a lot of iteration that we go through, working with different stakeholders, to the extent that we have to get the concurrence of the stakeholders that this is the mitigation measures that now actually work.
Okay. Irene, what I know is that our oil is waxy, that's what they say, and that the pipeline is going to be heated. And I'm told it's the longest oil pipeline in the world. So there are so many firsts, I suppose. I don't know whether there's another country that has the oil and the pipeline that has to be heated at some intervals so that it can continue flow. Those are some technological challenges and new things that Uganda will be venturing into, right?
Yes, it is true that our oil is waxy. At room temperature, our oil is like shoe polish, the way you see your shoe polish. So for you to move it, you need to keep it in fluid form, and we will be heating that pipeline. And when you talk about it being the longest pipeline, it is the longest, but we do have one other pipeline in the world, in India, that runs through Rajasthan, that is equally heated. And we visited that pipeline to study it and see how it relates to our pipeline. But in terms of the design, we're ensuring that the heating is done in an environmentally friendly manner. We have even introduced solar systems along the pipeline to be able to tap from that energy option as part of our renewable energy transition and management of aspects of climate change. But on the Ugandan side, we will see minimal intermittent heating. Most of it will be on the Tanzanian side, because the longest part, over 1,000 kilometers, is on the Tanzanian side. So that is something that we have paid attention to. The designs have been well thought through and approved by government, looking at these heating options.
So this pipeline we're talking about, is it going to be underneath, or can it actually be visibly seen?
So the pipeline will be buried, and that speaks to, again, our effort to minimize the carbon footprint and disturbance to the surrounding community and our stakeholders. So this pipeline is buried, and after its construction, you will literally not see much of that, apart from the above ground installations, the other auxiliary facilities, a pump here or there. But the major pipeline is all buried underneath, all the way to Tanzania.
Philip, you know, oil is a finite resource. And I'm told after 2 or 3 decades, maybe it's game over in terms of oil exploration. And there are some people who are saying, and I want to take you a little bit out of the oil sector, that, you know what, there are other sectors which should be Uganda's low-hanging fruits, that actually, if this money that we're putting in the oil sector, if you put it in tourism and put it in agriculture, the dividends are immense without even touching the fossil fuel, which has its environmental trouble and which the world is moving away from. But these hanging fruits could actually protect the environment, give us better results, better dividends with no risk. What do you tell them?
Yeah, yes, oil is a finite resource. I think in the context of our current projects, I'm sure you've always had people talking about 25 years or something in that order. But I think importantly, I just wanted to clarify that the 25 or 30 years speaks to the life cycle of that particular project. Now, what that means is that for Tilenga and Kingfisher, we might produce them for about that time and they will be exhausted. But that doesn't mean that that will be the end of the game, because you'll pick up on another discovery, for example, from the new exploration endeavors that will lead into a project and that will have a life cycle of its own. And so when we speak of finite resource, we also need to bear in mind that the projects come in at different times. And so while you might think of 25 years and that's it, but with other projects coming on board, it could go on and on for a couple of years, decades. Now, speaking about the other sectors, I think here I want to say that, you see, the oil and gas industry, like I pointed out a little earlier, is an industry that strives on extremely high quality, technological advancement, health, safety, and environment standards. And because of that, globally, it's been sort of a training ground for transferable skills. So with the resource that we have, it is, I mean, a good opportunity for our human resource, manpower, to tap in the sector, get those transferable skills that we can eventually, cascade it to the other sectors, agriculture, transportation, industries, fabrication, and things like that. And certainly, the contribution from the other sectors, depending on the the market in the country and in the region, can be immense. Okay. And so the oil and gas has a very big opportunity to contribute to the development of those sectors as well.
So talking about the market, what I know is that the oil prices on the global market can be volatile. And I don't know, in your calculations, at what level did you calculate the very minimum that where you can reach of the barrel of oil without causing you concern that here we're making a loss? It will have to be at what minimum level, a barrel of oil on the global market, for Uganda to still stay in the game without any pressure of making a loss?
We do run and maintain some economic models within the sector and manned by the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, but also the ministry. And from our assessment, we have assessed the break-even point,
yes, the break-even point
for this crude oil, and at $35 per barrel, we should be able to break even. So for as long as the prices...
That is even the money you have taken off for paying for the pipeline and all the other things at $35. But do you know, some time back, I think about 5 years back, the barrel of oil went even below 35.
So then the debate would be different at that time. But really, like you've already indicated...
Is that a safe zone, really?
That is the break-even point, okay. And good enough if you follow the projections and the historical performance of oil prices. They keep fluctuating, they recover. So, and we've seen it during COVID. We went as low as $0 per barrel, but today we are hitting again at about $87 per barrel. So you invest knowing that you will go through these interruptions, but on average, you should be able to have an attractive price. And from our assessment, at the, above $35 per barrel, we should be able to always break even and of course make a profit. And our projections indicate we should be able to make revenue of up to almost 41 billion US dollars, depending on how the oil prices behave over the years.
Do you get a sense, Philip, that Uganda in the oil sector, we are the Johnny come lately? Look, at the moment when you're hitting it big, then the world is turning a corner. You know, the United States and Europe are you know, manufacturing battery-powered cars, and that's where everybody wants to go. And here is when we are getting into the game, and we're like, what a timing for Uganda.
Yeah, I think you're right, and my PS mentioned a little earlier. The focus that we currently see on the role of oil and gas in this whole energy transition. And I think importantly, just to give you a context, that even some of the most stringent decarbonization scenarios in the world still see very significant contribution from oil and gas, yeah, in the decades to come. The first example is the International Energy Agency's Sustainable Development Scenario, which puts the consumption of oil and gas in 2040 at about 66.7 million barrels per day. 66.7 million barrels per day in 2040. Now, of course, that presents a reduction in demand, in oil and gas demand globally, but it puts it just about 30% below the consumption that we had in the year 2018, for example, which was about 99 point something million barrels per day. So that is the International Energy Agency projecting what the consumption would be. Now, if you look at another scenario, the Shell Sky scenario, for example, and this is an interesting one because the Shell Sky scenario is premised on ensuring a global net zero emission by 2070. Global net zero by 2070. And they do put the crude oil demand in 2050 at, again, 66.4. I think there's a 66.4 million barrels per day. Now that gives you a picture of the significance of oil and gas in this energy transition journey going into the future.
So you actually you have solid almost 27 years from now to be able to sell when the demand is still okay. Absolutely.
What is clear is that there is certainly a reduction in the global oil and gas demand going into the future, and that reduction is being caused by what you have just mentioned, yeah? Development of new energy technologies, energy efficiencies, battery-powered cars, things like cleaner energy or fewer sources of energy like hydrogen, you know, and things like that. But again, so two things that come out of that. That one, oil and gas is still here with us for some good time into the future, but most importantly, we also see that the main players in the industry, oil and gas industry, have decided to give themselves different timelines. You'll find the timeline given by Total to get to net zero is different from that of Shell and Total, Shell and Sinopec and the rest. And that speaks simply to the fact that they still see a future in oil and gas. So what I can say is that where we are, it comes down to us, the individual companies. What strategy are we putting on the table, and to what extent are we, to what extent are we presenting it to our stakeholders on our net zero goal? That's the only way we can continue to get financing from the international from the international community to finance our different strategies, including, oil and gas projects as well.
Okay, so I wonder, how much of benchmarking you've done? Because in Africa, I don't think you have so many examples where you can go and benchmark. I know we commended and lauded Ghana when they came before us and they were able to exploit their resource much faster. But I think also because their resource was right within the ocean, so it was easy to remove and then transport wherever they wanted. But across Africa, Nigeria or Sudan or Angola, the examples are not very many that you think you can go and learn. How can we avoid the Nigerian way but take the Norwegian way?
And we have benchmarked with many of these. So whenever we are evaluating our plans and thinking through benchmarks, we always aim for better. So we have a robust partnership with the Norwegian government, and if you study our model, it has been adapted to the Norwegian model for their petroleum industry when it comes to aspects of health, safety and environment. There is a lot of learning that we have done from the Norwegian government, but not only have we learned from the Norwegian government, we've also benchmarked with governments of Malaysia and Algeria, other oil producing countries. That doesn't mean that we've not studied the Nigerian case. We have, because again, you want to avoid the pitfalls. So you want to know, how did they get there? How do we avoid such pitfalls? We've also understood how they arrived at where they are today, although they are working to get out of that very difficult situation. So we have really benchmarked widely. If you look at our national oil and gas policy, the 10 objectives that go to provide a foundation for the oil and gas sector were largely consulted on, but well benchmarked to look at aspects of management of our resources, to ensure efficient production, to ensure that we address issues of environment, health and safety, but also security, to ensure aspects of national content. We learnt a lot from the Norwegian model on how to stimulate our national content. If you look at aspects of revenue management, yes, we have learnt a lot from the government of Norway. And if you look at how we set up our petroleum fund, in a way it was informed also by Norway's model, where they maintain a fund where petroleum revenues are kept. So we have done a lot of learning and unlearning as we go through this journey.
Well, now, sometimes oil attracts all sorts of players, some of them negative. Just across the lake, on the other side of the border, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, you have wars raging, different armed groups, attacking each other, killing Congolese. The other day there was an incursion through Ntoroko and they came. You only need one, God forbid, one incursion across Lake Albert into any of those areas, and the plans will just go haywire. Does that concern you?
Yes, certainly does. It does concern us as the project developers. And I think what I want to say is that in trying to put together the project development plan, we do undertake a very rigorous risk assessment. And the risk assessment includes issues of security, issues of health. You know that that area, in addition to security concerns, are also very prone to outbreaks of
hemorrhagic fevers.
Exactly, and other epidemics and things like that. So we do run a very detailed risk assessment, and we put in place mitigation measures to ensure that those risks that have been identified, are focused on, and the mitigation measures implemented. So yes, it does worry us, and we are continuously keeping an eye on some of those risks as they develop.
As you continue to explore, right, chances are that you're going maybe to find more deposits under Lake Albert, and Lake Albert is a shared water resource between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. I don't know whether you already have a mechanism on how that can be exploited without causing international acrimony between Uganda and Congo, because I remember something back, there was an issue with one island, I think it was called Rukwanzi. I don't know whether the Rukwanzi issue has ever been solved, because the Congolese were demanding Rukwanzi. We have a problem in Uganda of always trying to get into some island. On this side we have Megingo, on the other side we have Rukwanzi. I don't know whether the Rukwanzi issue was solved.
Maybe just to speak about you know, some shared reservoirs broadly. The way the industry manages shared reservoirs is that first of all, a shared reservoir does not necessarily mean that it's shared or it straddles an international boundary. It can be a reservoir that straddles two development blocks with different owners on either side of the blocks. Even in that case, you have to put in place a mechanism for ensuring that whatever resources that you produce from that reservoir is shared in accordance with the understanding of how the reservoir straddles that boundary. So it is similar to a reservoir that straddles an international boundary like Uganda and DRC. In the event that we find a shared reservoir, there are mechanisms for handling that. As a requirement in the industry, we are required to come up with a unitization agreement. There's something called a unitization agreement, with the parties being the owners of the owners of the block on either side of that boundary, whether it's an international boundary or a production boundary, coming together and agreeing on mechanism for not only developing that reservoir. They have to put a joint field development plan. They have to agree on how they understand in terms of distribution of the oil in that reservoir, how they understand how much oil and gas is on either side of the reservoir. And so they agree to some sort of sharing mechanism before the reservoir is even developed.
All right.
But before I leave that, between Uganda and Congo, we've had an agreement of cooperation to allow us to do work, you know, around the border area. And because there are certain type of data that you cannot just acquire and stop right on the border, because they will not make a lot of sense for you in terms of understanding the subsurface. An example is seismic data. You have to, if you're acquiring seismic data, you have to go a little beyond the area, your target area. And that means that in a way, if you're acquiring seismic data on Lake Albert and you are intending to visualize reservoirs that are around the border area, you have to acquire it a little beyond the border. And so we have an agreement of understanding with DRC to acquire such data beyond the international boundary. And there's an understanding of what information should be shared by the different, by the two countries.
All right, Phillips Obita and Irene Batebe, we're going to take a break, and on the spot we'll be right back. But when we come back, I'll be reading your questions and your comments. I'm sure you've been sending on our WhatsApp number. Please keep them coming so that they can read them, and my guests will be able to answer you. Should you be in disagreement with any of my guests here, that's normal, but please disagree with respect. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara, and my guests this evening are Irene Batebe, Permanent Secretary, Minister of Energy and Mineral Development, and we have Phillips Obita from UNOC, and we're discussing the oil sector. And this is the moment when you have to have your say. So you can send in your questions or your comments. I'll be reading them here on our magic wall, and my guests will be able to respond. And let me see who's going first. I think somebody called Okello. He said, greetings, thank you, Patrick, and NTV for the show. Impressive. From the beginning, my concern has always been on the negative impacts of the oil project on our environment and climate change. There's no doubt that this will have a significant impact on climate change. The world is fighting so hard to reduce fossil fuels. Here we are struggling to do the opposite. I think little consideration was made on environment impacts. I hope as a country we are ready for the future impact. Okello is watching from the United Kingdom. What would you tell Okello, Irene?
Thank you, Okello, all the way from the United Kingdom. And it's important that Okello and the other viewers follow our journey in the oil and gas industry. And I earlier indicated that we have taken time to put in place all the building blocks to ensure that we can exploit this resource in a sustainable manner, especially in terms of the environment. I did indicate that working with our authorities, the National Environment Management Authority, but also Ministry of Water and Environment, we have put in place the legal and regulatory framework to ensure that all oil and gas operations align and abide by the requirements for environmental and biodiversity conservation. Each of these companies operating in Uganda are not producing or preparing to produce without a plan when it comes to environment. They are required to undertake a comprehensive environmental social impact assessment, and not only do they undertake that, it is well consulted on, and later on the other authorities, including the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, ensures that they are implementing what they committed to at the time of approval of these impact assessments.
Okay.
So, and then all the designs of our projects, we have taken time to ensure that we embed in our designs aspects that ensure environmental protection. Today, when you come to Uganda, now that you're in the UK, you will note that we do not provide for venting or flaring of gas, meaning for all our operations, you cannot emit methane into the atmosphere.
All right.
Unless it's for operational purposes.
Okay, Irene, let's go to some other questions or comments coming in. Hello, Kamara. I'm Mwesigwa John from Bulisa. I'm an investor in hotel industry near CPF. My worry is that most of the oil-related stuff are supposed to be hosted in their camps. I think he's worried. I think that he may make some losses. And thank you for the program. I'm Okecha Robinson from Buhuka, Changwali, Kikuve district. I'm one of the PAP. Here the composition was okay, Sinuk, but we need to land titles where our new houses were built. I hope you're taking note of those, because I want you to read a couple of comments or questions so that you can take all of them, and also you'll be sharing them with the Mr. Obita. I am seeing a lot of expense on investment. Let us pray expense not exceed the earnings afterwards, and all our complete mission ends up with nothing after wasting the little we have and remain in debts. Take caution. Somebody is giving you. Thank you, Patrick. They should explain more on the percentage Uganda gets, and when will she benefit to 100%. And okay. Mr. Philip has said that some people are compensated and left on the same land where the pipeline passes. Does this pipeline cause a significant effect on the people settling on this land where the pipeline passes? And maybe let me thank you, Patrick, for hosting the PS, Madam Irene. People who are affected by the pipeline signed for monies some 2-3 years ago, and up to now, they have never paid them. Are they going to revalue their property? Thank you. It's Godfrey watching you from Kabale in Kiziramfumbi. There has been a lot of interest from the Albert and Graben. Most of the comments are coming from that direction. Good evening, thank you for the show. My question is, how will the Omuntu Awansi benefit from the oil project other than suffering a negative impact? Hannington is Isemutahwa. And yeah, those are some of the questions. I hope you pick them. If you can, maybe my producer is saying I can pick 1 or 2 more, and then you go for them at once. I am Norman here in Natete. Uganda will definitely get the oil revenue right. The question should be, will this money benefit the ordinary Ugandans? I forecast a Nigeria-like scenario where oil money benefits only the bigwigs in the country. How can you safeguard against the scavengers stealing the oil money? Hi there, this is Mwesigwa Joshua from Mutungo. Will that oil be able to pay our national debt? And how much barrels do we have under their net worth? Okay. Gentlemen and ladies who are sending in, their questions are too many, your comments are too many. I'm told the comments are flowing in like a river. Okello Patrick Bonyo from Busega. Oil flow in Uganda can be a good project if the project is handled in the interest of the country. And let me hope our bad manners of mismanaging of resources are tamed. Let me hope we don't suffer a Dutch disease, because every debt is now tied to oil. My guests, please, you share those questions, and Madam P.S. and Mr. Phillips Obita.
Okay, I will take aspects of the land titles and the compensation for the pipeline, and Phillips will come in on a number of other areas raised. On the person from Kingfisher area who inquired about the land titles, we are working with CNOC to ensure that all those who have been resettled, those who were handed over houses, get their titles. We are going through the titling process, and time and again we'll need your support, especially where we have to process letters of administration. We keep coming back to the project affected persons to provide such details to facilitate the processing of these titles. So these ones we are committing, it's part of the resettlement process, they will get their titles. We will use an example of the refinery area where we have finally handed over the titles to all the affected persons because of, it takes time to process these titles, but we commit and we will ensure that these affected persons get their titles. There was a question on the land compensation for the ECOP, where valuation was done 2 to 3 years ago, and the question was whether there will be a review of the valuation rates for the affected persons. We already entered compensation agreements with the affected persons. We've already commenced the payment or compensation, so the cash payments are already ongoing. So for as long as we have committed and we've entered the compensation agreement, that process has largely been concluded. But we did review before we came to the affected persons with these compensation agreements, and the rates they agreed to, we are in agreement with them. And like Philip presented earlier, only about 2 or so have contested these rates. So we will proceed with the ongoing cash compensation to ensure that we cover all the remaining. Today we've covered about over 60%, and by mid of this year we should have compensated almost to 100% of the affected persons along the East Africa crude oil pipeline. Phillips.
Okay, thank you. I'll just try to categorize the question. There was a question around any environmental effects on PAPs that have only been partially compensated for disturbance of the pipeline passing through a portion of the land, and whether they are at any risk. I think what I want to say is that yes, during the construction phase of the pipeline, there will certainly be disturbance, and that's why we put in place those mitigation measures. However, like we discussed a little earlier, the pipeline is going to be a buried facility 2 meters below the ground surface, and once the construction work has been completed, the areas, the 30-meter corridor for the pipeline will be rehabilitated. And this essentially speaks to the effort that we're trying to put in place to ensure that the environmental footprint of the project is as low as possible. So if the pipeline is only going to pass through a portion of your land, not directly through your homestead, once it's been constructed and fully rehabilitated and it's under the ground, there's certainly no risk, if not very minimum risk, if not no risk at all, for you to continue using that portion of the land, including grazing your animals over the area where the pipeline passes. I also want to mention that being below the ground, the pipeline is designed in a manner that should be able to detect any leak from the system. We have leak detection system throughout the entire length of the pipeline. We have fiber optic cables that will run from the Indian Ocean, the Seacom, all through the entire length of the pipeline to Kabale. And that will enable us to detect any leak or any leakage along the pipeline route real time. And so I want to give comfort to our viewers that for scenarios like that where you're not, your homestead is not directly over the pipeline, you certainly have very, very minimum risk. And you are free to use that portion of the land where the pipeline passes. There were questions around how the local people will benefit from the oil and gas projects, the Muntia Wansi. There were questions around whether the money will be enough to cover our national debt. Let me just paint the picture of the benefits that this project will give us as a country. And they are in a few categories. One, we shall have direct cash flow to the national treasury. And like my PS said, that money will go direct to the petroleum fund. And the money going to the petroleum fund, of course, will be used for infrastructure development that will again have trickle-down effects to the other sectors and to the local Ugandans. But beside that, we spoke about the job opportunities that these projects offer. And this cuts across board, skilled, unskilled, semi-skilled. And these are some of the avenues where the Ugandan citizens can benefit from these projects. If you go out there to the areas of operation, people have got jobs. And like I mentioned, we are in excess of 10,000 workforce now, just for the upstream projects, Tilenga and Kingfisher. And these jobs will continue to increase as we get to the peak of the construction phase. Of course, there are contract opportunities as well, which we highlighted. Subcontracts from some of the key players that have been awarded the main contracts. It could be, provision of catering services, food, agriculture, transportation services, courier services. There are many, and those are some of the areas where the Omuta Wansi can benefit from. Our current estimate of the direct cash flow to the national treasury, and this is really speaking about the royalty that the government will be getting from the production, from the different blocks, the profit royal share that will go directly to the government, and the taxes, the corporate income tax that will be levied on the companies, including ourselves, will be in the tune of $20 billion over the 25 years life cycle of the project. Now, this is not yet including the dividends that will come from UNOC's participation, direct participation in all the projects. And again, as a company, we estimate that we'll be getting revenue to the tune of $10 billion US, and certainly will contribute to the national treasury in form of dividends. So there is a lot that we stand to benefit from the oil and gas operations.
All right. I want to thank you so much, but there's one more question. Okay, yeah.
Yes, there was a question on the level of petroleum resources that we have in terms of amount. It's important that we answer that.
Yes.
So for the areas, what we term the contract areas, where we have so far issued production sharing agreements, we have a total of 6.5 billion barrels, what we call standard tank oil initially in place, the entire amount in our reserves, but in our reservoirs. However, of that, 1.4 billion barrels is what we are recovering, and that will go to the crude oil pipeline, but also the oil refinery. Of course, this is only for about 10% of the 40% of the area that is explored today. We do have an additional over 60% of the country
to explore.
So there's potential for more.
And 1.4 billion barrels are recoverable. I think maybe to put it in context, the world consumes about 60 million barrels a day, right? Yes. The entire world.
Yes.
In one day, 60 million barrels. And we have 1.4 billion barrels that's recoverable. I just thought I should explain that. Maybe it can give a picture.
Yes.
Okay. So as we try to wind up, you're the PS Ministry of Energy, and it's not often for me to have this rare opportunity. We've been building a dam on Karuma, and that dam should have been commissioned so many even years back. It's not. Why is Karuma not commissioned up to today?
Oh, okay. This is a good turn of events
Yes,
of the interview. Thank you, Mr. Kamara. Yes, Karuma is in advanced stages of completion, and as we speak, we've commenced the wet testing. This is now testing the turbines in preparation for actual commissioning and operation. So our plan is to commission in a staged manner, starting with 1 or 2 units, at least within the next 3 months, have at least the first 100 or 200 megawatts, depending on how the testing goes, and then keep ramping up to the 600 megawatts by June of this year. So as you test, of course, there will be certain aspects that you discover, because this is a project that has been under construction for quite some time, about 6 years or so. So there are a few areas that we are addressing as we go through the wet commissioning. So we should have the 600 megawatts fully commissioned by mid of this year.
You know, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that is supposed to give them about 6,000 megawatts has taken them a shorter time, but also when you compare in terms of price, I think the other was like $4 billion. Ours is giving us 600 megawatts at over $1 billion. Why is it so expensive?
Well, I hope you're also aware about economies of scale. The bigger the dam, probably the cheaper it would likely be. But we went through a proper selection of this developer, and we did evaluate the BOQs for this dam. And when you look at the tariff that we intend to achieve from Karuma, it's one of the very most attractive tariffs at about 4.9 US cents per kilowatt hour, way below some of the other dams that we set up. So for us, it has been cost effective, really, in terms of its implementation.
And as a ministry, you have suffered another issue of vandalism of the what is supposed to be, I'm sure, the evacuation line of the power from Karuma and other places. How are you in control now?
Yes, and if you follow for the last 3 weeks or a month about, there's been quite some stability when it comes to this infrastructure. We did face increased vandalism, especially just before Christmas. We were having significant vandalism on our transmission lines, but also the distribution networks. We have worked with the different security organs to ensure that this is put under control, and as we speak, they have done a good job. But internally, as the Minister of Energy, we continue to deploy a number of interventions. I might not make mention of all of them, but some of them include surveillance systems to be able to keep track of these vandals, but also creating public awareness on this matter. You're aware we passed the Electricity Amendment Act, where we provide for punitive measures against vandals, and we want to warn them, if you're caught, the prosecution is now hefty in the courts of law. So that's some of the sensitization we are making for them to know that the price to pay is significant when you're caught vandalizing this infrastructure. Otherwise, for now, the situation is under control.
And lastly, I understand Umeme is supposed to be exiting the Ugandan market. What will be the impact of them exiting?
We did have a concession with Umeme, or we are running a concession with Umeme, and it was time bound. It is expected after 20 years, come 2025, that this concession will come to its natural end, meaning that Umeme is very aware of these terms. So we've been working with them, and they are very cooperative on this. As part of our post-concession management plan, we expect that we will see our national utility company, the Uganda Electricity Distribution Company, who owns these assets, by the way. The assets are on the books of the Uganda Electricity Distribution Company. So all they are taking back is the operations of these assets. So we are working with them to see how we support UEDCL to be able to take back the operations of their assets, but also in this arrangement we are looking at how best to have a public-private partnership where the Uganda Electricity Distribution Company comes in as the majority shareholder, and the private sector, leveraging on the strengths of the private sector, comes in as a minority shareholder. So those are some of the plans that we are working on, and we are working very well with Umeme, and they are aware of these plans.
I want to thank you so much. Our time is almost out. Let me ask you, Mr. Phillips Obita, to give us your concluding remark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamara, and to all our viewers out there. I just want to say that the boat is now sailing, and we are on course to deliver first oil by 2025. There are plenty of opportunities out there for all the different players, companies, at personal levels, employment. So I think the task is on us individually to go and look out for these opportunities, pursue them, and to help us make the most and derive the most benefit out of the oil and gas.
Right. Thank you. And Irene, your parting shot.
Yes, we are on a path of no return when it comes to our oil and gas sector. FID done, commencement of drilling ongoing. So we want to confirm to Ugandans and all our viewers that really the government is committed to ensure that these resources are exploited in a sustainable manner, looking at aspects of environment, but also aspects of human right protection, ensuring that communities are benefiting from this resource, and broadly that as a nation, the revenues accruing from the resource are put to good use. I want to thank the viewers who have listened to us for an hour or so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene Vateve, the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. Thank you so much, Mr. Obita, Phillips from UNOC. But most importantly, thank you who has been watching this broadcast, because we have to thank you for the privilege of your company. We have had two public officials here speaking with a lot of passion, experience, and skill about this subject. And like they've said, the boat is sailing. Irene is the captain of this boat. We can only wish them, can only say to them, bon voyage. Good night, and God bless Uganda.